Welcome to video 7 from chapter 9, where we will finish this chapter by looking at language disorders. And there are 4 types of communication disorders I'll start with here. The first is what's actually called language disorder. It affects both the understanding of language, which we call receptive language, as well as the ability to produce language. We call this expressive. And so there are problems in both producing and receiving language. Children with language disorder tend to have a limited vocabulary. They often have problems using tense correctly. So, knowing to add ed when you're speaking of something in the past, and as example, they also tend to produce simpler and shorter sentences compared to their same age peers. In a speech sound disorder, this causes difficulty producing sounds or using sounds correctly for the child's age. So this is, centered around the production of sounds. So this is considered just an expressive problem, and the child does not necessarily show any receptive issues. Example is that when speaking, they may substitute one sound for another. Another expressive disorder is childhood onset fluency disorder, or what most people refer to as stuttering. It's a disorder in which the child has difficulty with fluency of speech and the timing pattern of speech. So this is once again an expressive disorder. This child may not have any difficulties at all understanding, using receptive language, and understanding others. But when most of us understand what stuttering is like, it's a timing problem. There are repetitions of words. There are pauses, sometimes within a word or within sentences. Sometimes they can be very long pauses, and so it really interferes with fluent communication. Some people, I've heard the attitude before that some people don't, really think of stuttering as a big deal, but I mean, it has far-ranging effects on children. They often become very shy because of the stuttering issue, and not wanting to speak in front of others, and so it has a lot of social implications during childhood, as well as educational implications. If they're not speaking, speaking in school very much. So it really does have a lot of significant effects. The child feels different, and often they're often very embarrassed by their stuttering disorder. The 4th communication disorder is called a social or pragmatic communication disorder. So this one affects both expressive and receptive language. And also, it's not just verbal communication, but also nonverbal communication. So it doesn't matter if this child, all of a sudden learns, let's say, they also learn sign language. I mean, their communication disorder is not going to disappear. They would show the same problems in using sign language, or even same problems using written language if they were trying to communicate through writing. So it affects basically all forms of communication. Somebody with a pragmatic communication disorder, they lack basic pragmatic and meta-linguistic skills, which is about how to use language appropriately. in different situations. Um, so a child with this disorder, they would have trouble with turn taking in conversations, waiting for other people to finish before they start talking. Um, they would not change how they speak to people in different situations. Like I mentioned that, a normally developing child, they'll learn to speak differently to when they talk to a 2-year-old versus talking to an adult versus talking to their friends. A child with this disorder just talks the same to every group. And so they don't change their speech when they're talking to a young child, for instance, or talking to an adult. Um, they also have problems with a lot of normal social conventions, like using greetings with others. Um, what else? Using manners appropriately, just other pleasantries like that. Things that you learn to do in order to be social with others, and to be pleasantly social with others. So you learn to say hi and bye, and to use manners and things like that. And, a child with this disorder does not. So this is an interesting disorder. It's really about communicating. A child like with this disorder, they may know their ABCs perfectly. They may have a very good vocabulary. They can produce language appropriately, but it's just there's something in the brain that where they just don't learn these conversational rules that all of us pick up on through our development during childhood. Okay, so those are 4 communication disorders. Um, I talked about ASD a little bit in another chapter, um, but it's coming up here again because one of the major aspects of autism spectrum disorder is the communication related problems that affects somebody with ASD. In fact, I would say that's really the hallmark of this disorder, autism spectrum disorder, is that it is there is always some form of communication difficulties, and there is a wide range of different types of difficulties, just like, which is why this is a spectrum disorder. There's in very severe cases, a child would not learn to speak at all or communicate at all. And when I say speak, it's not like they can then learn to write instead or use sign language instead. Like they cannot learn to use language at all. And that's just in the most severe cases. Um, in lesser cases, like in Asperger's disorder, there will just be some quirkiness in when they communicate with others. They can adequately communicate and be understood with others. But example, I'll just use my ex-wife's brother had Asperger's, and um, whenever I talked to him, he would look up past my head. He would never connect eyes. Like he would never look me in the face. When he spoke, he always had to kind of look to the side of the head of the person he's speaking to, and in order to communicate with him. So it was a little bit of quirkiness, but he was fine to talk to it otherwise. And so there is, once again, so there's a wide range of communication related problems. And when I say that, in severe cases a child doesn't learn language, in those severe cases, they really don't learn to connect to others at all. And so it's not just, I don't mean to make it like, I might make it sound like it's mainly about communication, but they won't, in those severe cases, they won't hug others. They won't hug their parents. They won't go to them. Like they're in the severe cases, they're off in their own world, and there's like virtually little to no social interaction with others. But once again, I do want to point out it's a spectrum. There are, I'm talking mainly about the most severe cases. In a lot of less severe cases, there's some forms of communication established, and of various levels. Just to finish here, some autistic children may have echolalia. and so it's got the word echo in it, which is a clue to this word. And this is when the autistic child repeats whatever you say. So if you were to say something like, I don't know, do you want to have dinner? Then they might go, do you want to have dinner? And then you say, oh, don't repeat me. And they say, don't repeat me. I mean, you know how some children do that just to be annoying. Well, sometimes autistic children, this is something that they can't help and will just repeat things that they hear from others constantly that who are trying to talk to them. And we're going to finish with dyslexia. This is, this is technically what you call a learning disability, but it certainly has language implications. When you think of dyslexia, you probably think of it being a reading disorder, but it is much more than that. One of the hallmarks is difficulties with reading fluently, but as it says here, those reading issues often stem from a difficulty separating sounds of the speech they hear. So they have trouble separating sounds and translating, the hearing of the letters in a word, to actually like being able to write them. So, if an example might be like, I don't know. I don't know. They hear the word cat and can't and may not be able to come up with the individual sounds of a simple word like that. Even though they can hear the word properly, they may be able to produce the word properly, but they can't go from hearing it to thinking about what letters are in the word. Okay. Sorry, I had to pause and let my dog out of the room. Okay, anyways, so dyslexia creates problems, as it says here, with learning to spell and with reading written words. So it's where am I going with this? So even though it shows up there, often somebody with dyslexia may communicate perfectly fine with others, so you don't really see it in communication as well. I mean, it's not something you can notice. You can't notice if somebody has dyslexia just by talking to them. It really does show up in written language, reading and spelling, but it starts with their skills at decoding what they're hearing. And then this affects their reading as well as their spelling. Children who are diagnosed with dyslexia show certain neurological differences. For example, they tend to have smaller connections between Broca's area and Wernicke's area, which are two specialized language centers in the left side of our brain. And when you look at the neural pathways that connect those two areas, they tend to be smaller in somebody with dyslexia. So we don't have a full understanding yet. This is one finding that is they're continuing to research dyslexia. But as far as interventions, one of the interventions that has had some success helping children with dyslexia to improve their reading is just systematic and quality training in phonics. Now, most children do receive training in phonics when they first go to school and they're learning to read, but it really, you need some good quality intensive extra phonics training, and they have found that just providing like some intensive phonics training and intervention can really over time help with the dyslexia. Okay, and that will conclude video 7 and conclude chapter 9, and also unit 3 will be finished.